So now let's look at John's account of the first disciples. So we use Luke as our basis. Now we're going to go to John 1:35 through 42. Now, there's going to be a big change here. In Luke, when he talks about this first joining of the disciples, you remember where he was? He gives the account from Galilee when they're by the Gennesaret, the Galilean Sea. He's talking about Peter, James, and John, and they're fishing. So Luke gives his account of the first disciples when they're in Galilee. John, we're going to see, he gives his account of the first disciples when he's in Judea. So obviously, Jesus didn't select the same disciples in Galilee, and then months later, or he didn't select the ones in Judea, and these ones in Galilee are different guys. We're going to see they're the same men. But John gives the account of Jesus meeting them in Judea. Luke doesn't give any of that information. Luke doesn't even mention of Jesus being in Judea prior to him talking about Jesus in Galilee. Why? This is Luke's method of presenting things. Could it be that some of the other Gospels were written before Luke? I think it's possible his was one of the last ones. So maybe he didn't feel the need to repeat things that were already told. I mean, you've been with friends and you tell stories, and you don't go back. You know, if they've been lifelong friends or people that are acquaintance of you, you don't go back and start giving a description of your mom and dad and, you know, we lived at this house. They knew all of that. So it's very possible that when Luke gave his account, he knew that there was enough stories out there that gave many details that he did not feel a need to repeat them. And he presents his story starting in Galilee, because that's where Jesus first started his real ministry. So, you know, why start anyplace else for him? Okay, so let's look at John's account. And you're going to find as you read and study, John's Gospels is definitely different than all the others. He has his message that he's bringing. He doesn't mention Jesus' birth. He doesn't give genealogies. He just starts right out. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. His message is Christ the Messiah, Christ God. He's bringing that direct message. So in John 1, verse 35, he talks about John the Baptist. He goes through a story of John the Baptist, and he says, and again, the next day, John was standing with two of his disciples. This is verse 35. And he looked upon Jesus as he walked, and he said, behold, the Lamb of God. And the two disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. And Jesus turned, beheld them following, and said to them, what do you seek? And they said to him, Rabbi, which translate means teacher, where are you staying? And he said to them, come and you will see. They came therefore and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. One of the two disciples who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. Okay, now, so you get that picture clear. Andrew and another unnamed disciple were with John the Baptist. And John sees Jesus coming, and he said, behold, the Lamb of God. Then these two disciples, Andrew and the one whose name is not mentioned, they start following Jesus. And he says, why are you following me? What do you want? And they said, we want to go with you, and so forth. So they stay with him that night. Well, Andrew, the one that John says his name, he goes and finds his brother, who is Peter. So look what he says. And he says, and one of the two who heard John speak, now John is John the Baptist, not John the Apostle. John speak and follow him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He found first his own brother Simon. Andrew found Simon and said to him, we have found the Messiah, which translated means Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, you are Simon, the son of John, and you shall be called Cephas, which is translated Peter. So you have John's account. His first mention is Andrew. Another. Is Andrew and another disciple. John doesn't say who this other disciple is. He just says there's two of them. So we have Andrew. We have this second disciple, which is not mentioned. And then Andrew, he goes and gets Peter. So that's our third disciple. And we know just from John's writing that this other disciple is John. It's the gospel writer John, who he's not saying his own name. John has a tendency, and I think I wrote it down in here. John has a tendency, he if you read the Gospel of John, he never once says his own name. He never refers to himself by name. He will use expressions like this. It doesn't say it was John, but he does give his own. He doesn't give his own name in the Gospel. He uses phrases like the disciple whom Jesus loved. When you get a chance, look at John 13, 23 through 25. 13, 23 through 25. That's where John uses the term the disciple whom Jesus loved. In that case, he's describing. I believe it's where he's describing the Last Supper, and they're asking questions, and someone asked this question, and John, in writing, he says, yes, the disciple whom Jesus loved, ask him, who will betray you? It's John writing about himself, but he doesn't say his own name. He says, the one who Jesus loved. Another place, John writes in 1935 that he who saw it has borne witness. So the things that I'm telling you, he that's writing these things saw all of these things. Now, why he doesn't say, I saw all of these things and I'm writing them clearly, he chooses not to use anything in that first person. And then the last place that I have listed here in John 19, verse 35. Is that what I just gave you? Yeah. John 20, 1 through 4. On the day of the resurrection, when it says two of the disciples, John's given this account again, two of the disciples hear that Jesus is out of the tomb. The tomb's empty. And John's describing Peter and this other disciple are running towards the tomb, and he says, and the other disciple ran faster and got there first. He's talking about himself again. So when we see that John never mentions his name, I think it's pretty safe to assume that this other disciple that he's not saying the name is himself. So the first two that John records being called are Andrew and John. And then John goes and gets Peter, his brother. So now you have the three. And then we'll read on. And I just broke the speaker. All right, give me a second. Okay, go back to John, the first chapter, because we're going to look at the other two disciples that John brings into the picture. And we'll start in verse 43. And the next day, so the previous day, they're in Judea. He calls Andrew. Well, Andrew and John start following Jesus, and they decide they're going to stay with him. Andrew goes and gets Peter, his brother. So now you have the three. And it says in verse 43, and it says, the next day he purposed to go forth into Galilee. So it's kind of interesting. Here we go again. So John is talking about these early disciples even before Jesus went to Galilee, where Luke gives the account of Jesus calling these men. So I have a thought about that, and hopefully we'll get to that. It says the next day he purposed to go to Galilee, and he found Philip. It doesn't say where he found Philip, but just somehow he found Philip, and he said to him, follow me. Now Philip was from Bethsaida, of the city of Andrew and Peter. So Philip somehow connected with Andrew and Peter. And Philip found Nathanael. So after Jesus called Philip, Philip goes and he finds Nathanael. So we got number 4. And then number 5. Nathanael. And go back to verse 43. And the next day he purposed to go to Galilee, and he found Philip, and Jesus said to him, follow me. Now Philip was from Bethsaida, of the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And Nathanael said to him, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Philip said to him, come and see. Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him and said to him, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no gall. Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? Jesus answered and said to him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Nathanael answered him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Jesus answered and said to him, because I've said to you that I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You shall see greater things than these. And he said, truly, truly, I say to you, you shall see the heavens open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. So here's another little interesting item that comes into here, is that in John's account, it's Andrew, and we're assuming John. Andrew goes and gets Peter, and then they find Philip, who is from the same city as Andrew and Peter. They find Philip, and then Philip, he goes and gets Nathanael. Now, we don't know where he is, but obviously Luke is saying that Nathanael was sitting underneath a fig tree. So, what do you think? What do you think? Is there any reason why they would say he was sitting under a fig tree? Well, there is. There's some information, and these are again some of the details that, as you pull these details in, they bring some clarity to the scriptures. And I did a little research, and here's what I come up with about the fig tree. Because Jesus said, okay, here comes an Israelite. Indeed, is there no gall? And I saw you when you were under the fig tree. And Nathanael goes, what? How'd you know I was under a fig tree when Philip come and got me? Well, he's God, so I guess he saw him there. And here's what the commentary on this. It says, the fig tree was a common place for prayer, especially for young rabbinic students, which Nathanael may have been. If he was specifically under a fig tree when Philip called him, chances are he was in prayer. So one of the things that they did as a student of a rabbi, when they would do prayer, they would find a fig tree and sit underneath the fig tree and do their prayers. And the Jewish believer was taught that when he prays, if he does not pray for the coming Messiah, he is not prayed at all. So here's the picture. Philip's under this fig tree, and we're just assuming that being under the fig tree that he was praying. And one of the things that they were taught as a student was when you pray, you should be praying for the coming Messiah to come. So here's Philip under the tree, Nathaniel under the tree. He's praying for the Messiah to come. And here comes Philip and says, I found the Messiah. Ironic, divine. With the rise of the Pharisaic movement, with the Pharisees coming on the scene stronger, basically a back to the Bible group, the hope of the coming Christ had been reawakened. It had been a lot of years they were waiting for the Messiah. He had not come. Now the nation is back in Israel. Even though they're under Roman rule, they're still anticipating this Messiah who's going to come and relieve them from the Roman oppression. So here's Nathaniel under this fig tree. He's praying, possibly, praying for the Messiah. It was on everyone's mind and everybody's prayers. If Nathaniel had been at prayer, chances are he was praying for the Messiah. Then Jesus tells him, I saw you under the fig tree, and Nathaniel declares, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, King of Israel. So what it does to me in doing that little bit of research about him under the fig tree, it tells me that this whole thing that John is relaying to us about Nathaniel isn't just an odd little story. It's a divine intervention where Nathaniel, he's doing as a student what he's supposed to be doing. He's praying. He's under the fig tree. He's praying for the Messiah to come. And then here comes Philip and says, I found the Messiah. It's just a part of the scriptures that can easily be overlooked without that understanding. And then John gives an account of them going into Galilee, and they go to the wedding in Cana, where it says, when we look at that account, the disciples were invited there. And then eventually they go to Capernaum and Bethsaida, the home of all of them. We don't know about Nathaniel, but we know that Andrew and Peter and John are from that same area. I didn't mention James. I just mentioned, John's just talking about himself here. So in John the first, there's 5. We could assume that if this is the John, it's very likely that his brother James was with him. When we looked at the account here in Galilee, it says James and John, the sons of Zebedee. So it very well could have been, it doesn't say it, but it's very well there could have been 6 of them. Andrew, Peter, John, his brother James, Philip, and Nathaniel. It does, I'm not saying it is, but it's very possible. If John was down in Judea for one of the festivals, it's very likely his brother James was with him. But for some reason, he chooses not to include that. Okay? Another little side note, and we're going to have to finish on this one. How would you like to go through your life when anybody introduces you? They say, this is Andrew, the brother of Peter. He's always put as the brother of Peter, never this is Andrew, and this is his brother, Peter. It's always Andrew, the brother of Peter. So I don't know that it was an issue for Andrew. I know people often tease their siblings. Well, he's the younger. He's the little boy. He's the baby of the family or whatever. I don't know the ages if John was the older. I don't know that. But all right. Well, we didn't get as far as I wanted, but next time we're gonna pick up with Mark's account, and I'll give you the passages real quick, and if you get a chance, you can read these. Mark 1, 16 through 21, and then Matthew 4, 18 through 22. All right? Father, we